have I got an interview for you. Kerri Wise from TrueCar is going to join me today, and we're going to talk about leadership, mentorship, and one of the biggest points that she brought up during this interview that has really helped her navigate her career is the ability to understand different communication styles for not just your team, but for managing up. And managing up is one of the hardest things for people to understand how to do. And we're going to tackle it in this interview. So let's jump in to my interview with Kerri Wise. Hi, and welcome back to another episode of You're in Charge. Now what? I'm your host, Glenn Pasch, and the goal of this channel is to help those of you that now find yourself in charge of a team, a division, or even a business build the skills necessary to lead high-performing teams. Each week, we're going to focus on one topic. This week, I have a guest with me, and we're going to share some strategies that have helped us build our businesses or helped us in our career so that you can generate consistent results. If you're new to the channel or you've returned, just click the subscribe button. That would mean a lot to me so that you can be up to date on all the new videos. And as always, just leave comments down below. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. So let's just jump into, because I'm so excited to have Kerri Wise with me today. I met Kerri, God, now, I don't know how many years, but a few years. And the one thing that I will say to you for the audience, she is truly one of the most genuine, nice people in the industry that we're in, but don't think that that's just because she's nice, she's weak. Very committed, very strong, very determined, very competitive. And I want you to understand that balance. So without further ado, hi, Kerri. How are you today?
Hi, thanks so much for having me on. I'm really
this is going to be a lot
here.
of fun. Yeah, so before we get started and jump in here, tell everybody a little bit about yourself, and then we'll just see where today goes.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Kerri Wise. I'm a wife, I'm a mother, but I'm also a professional in the automotive business. So I've been working in auto for 22 years, I think it is now, since 1998. And I've worked at various companies, started at JD Power and Associates, moved on to Edmunds.com, and now I'm at TrueCar. TrueCar is a car shopping website. I've worked in all kinds of areas, from insights to training to marketing. I'm now the VP of communications at TrueCar. So I lead really all of our brand and external efforts from a communication standpoint, from a PR standpoint, but also I'm very invested in the automotive dealership industry side, speak at a lot of conferences, and really just represent TrueCar to the industry.
So yes, and as I said, I love your style of speaking. I've watched you speak, and you really have a very genuine quality about you as an educator, and it comes across because you really do care about the audience. So a couple things I want to chat with you about today, your perspective, and one of them was you sort of alluded to it. You were involved in training, which means that I'm dealing with teams. So in your career, when you've been leading, and now you're still leading, but when you're really in that training and developing and things along those nature, for someone who's just taking over that role, what would you say one of the most effective things or things that worked for you that you could share with them to say, here's a key. I think if you do this, this will get you off on a good foot.
Yeah, so I think when I first became a manager, I didn't really have a good idea of what leadership really was. I think all of us were kind of promoted. We get our first, supervisor title or manager title, and we kind of think we know what it's like.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, it was like, hey, I got this big title, like I'm on my way up. And it was very kind of thinking about myself in many ways, right?
Yes.
And kind of like I've arrived or now I'm here. And really what you learn over time is that leadership is so much more about serving
Right.
And it isn't so much about you and you being the boss and me, taking charge. And it's so much more about serving and really understanding your team, right? And getting to know them on an individual basis. And so, if I was to give the advice, one, I would say, your emotional intelligence, especially
Hmm.
these days, is like so much more important probably than anything tactically,
Right.
in kind of getting to know people and then adjusting your leadership style to the individuals, right? I used to try that one size fits all approach of like, this is the way I'm going to lead. And then
Right.
you'll slowly realize like, oh, no, 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 no. It's really about adjusting it to the individuals and trying to get the most out of them, get the best out of them by meeting them where they are.
So I love that because and there's a few things I want to unpack in there
Yeah.
because I think what you said is one of the biggest mistakes I see with some new managers is they feel that getting that promotion, and it's funny how you pivoted from saying managing and then you pivoted to say, well, leadership, right?
Yeah.
I think that is that balance of what is a manager, what is a leader. And sometimes managers to me are more tactical.
Mhm.
We have to do, and leadership has to be this vision. But when you were talking about that, I got my promotion, I arrived, and it almost felt like I'm done, and then it's all about me, and I think that's a really big key to understand is that the best leaders, the ones who, if we think back, the ones who have impacted us the most cared more about us than they did about them. But
Yeah.
I want to really talk about when you say adapting, because I think
Mhm.
I don't want to breeze over this because someone's going to listen to that and say, well, okay, Kerri, how do I adapt my style to other people? Is it communication, how you communicate with each other, with different people? Can you explain a little bit more in detail about that?
Yeah, and I'm probably more educated on this now than I was early on in my career.
Hmm.
There are certain personality tests that you can take,
Right.
DISC being one of them. I've done a lot of training on that one in particular. But I think no matter what tool you use or even just your own approach, all of it is kind of driving to the point that we're just different in how we think as human
Right.
beings, right? And so I think, initially and for many years in my career, I was just trying to drive kind of my own initiative, right? Like, one, replicating myself, like trying to get people
Right.
to be like me,
Hmm.
because, I do it the best way. And so therefore, I want you to do it exactly how I do it.
Right.
Or really having a high level of judgment of people, right? That they're not thinking like me, they're not doing like me, and so therefore they're wrong. And so I think
Right.
adapting is there's a high level of communication that, in terms of adapting your style. I'll give you
Hmm.
an example. Someone, if you follow DISC, someone who's more dominant in terms of
Right.
personality kind of like says what they want, and they're motivated by kind of this direct communication. Someone who has more of the I kind of influence is more people based and kind of wants to know kind of the bigger picture and the
Right.
story. And someone who's analytical is very numbers oriented, and they're
Hmm.
just driven by like, give me the facts. I'm driven by the facts, right?
Right.
And so you got these different personalities, and you can get the best out of all of them, but they're not going to hear what you're saying quite the same way unless you
Right.
angle it towards their personality. And I think that from an adapting standpoint, it's like, how do I communicate with this person in a way that they are going to understand me,
Hmm.
and they're going to get inspired and excited to really lean in on it.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I don't think there's enough. And part of why I started this channel was
Yeah.
because I don't think there's a lot of discussion about that. As
Mm-hmm.
you said, we get promoted because we're good at one thing, but
Yes.
that doesn't make us a good teacher of that thing because maybe we don't have the patience. And like you said, everyone has to do it my way because I was successful versus understanding that I may have to tell you the story, right? So to be another example, I had two people who worked at a previous job. They were my two right hands, and they couldn't have been more different. One person You had to just tell them exactly what you wanted. Like you said, the dominant, A, B, C, D, go. If you anytime you wanted to explain something, they would look at you and say, you're wasting my time. Just tell me what to do. The other person, we had to have a conversation about what they did yesterday and how their day was and everything else just to get them going. And if I didn't have that conversation, they thought I was mad at them. And they spent the rest of the day wondering why I was mad at them, and it distracted them from work. So even if it was frustrating for me, meaning really, I knew that what I needed was that person performing well. So I knew that I had to spend 5 minutes to get 8 hours of productivity. I'll give you the 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
On the flip side, if I gave this person 10 minutes of how was your day, I distracted them. So I think understanding your people and having that empathy about them, meaning I want to take care of you. I want to make sure you understand what I want in the way that you receive that information. Then we all win versus one size fits all. I think that's very, very, really good point. And as I said, I don't think a lot of people, especially even at dealership level, I mean, in automotive, I don't think people understand that. Big corporations, they do it at TrueCar and they do it at other large corporations because they understand that.
And the reward, people are motivated by different things as well. And that was also kind of hard for me to learn initially, because you think about yourself. And, you might be very self-motivated. I was very self-motivated. I never really did things per se for the dollar. I wanted to move up in my career. I wanted to make money, but it was like, for me, the work was probably more important. Like, I want to work on interesting projects and things. And so, but for other people, they're motivated by different things. It might be work-life balance, or it could be money. Or it could be, that they're like me, like they're working on interesting work. And so I think that also is kind of that adapting of like, what is the carrot that you're kind of swinging in front of that person that's going to want to make them do more? And you talk about auto retail. I feel like that's a huge struggle, because traditionally on the sales side, the money was what drove, right? You're going to hustle and so you can make more money. And people were driven by that. But I think about this new generation, not to add another topic, but like, they're not as driven by money. They'd be happy if you gave them a day off so they can go volunteer with their charity of choice.
Yeah. And you were almost looked down upon if you were not motivated by money. If they said, well, why aren't you working this hard? And why don't you want more? And you're going, but then I'm not enjoying the other side. And I think this new generation, again, I feel so old when I say that, but I think they see that all of that drive, all of that work, they saw their parents exhausted and coming home and missing out on other things. And I think they looked at it and said, I don't want that. That doesn't look like fun. So if I can make enough where I am happy, or I have some sort of career path where I see that I'm going to move up. But to your point is it may not be a raise monetarily, but if I can go work on this project, or I could go learn this. At the same pay, that to them is a promotion. And I think from, to sort of wrap this little piece up, it's knowing what motivates. And if you're at a company long enough, it could evolve, because it could be money in the beginning, it could be projects. But then if I have a family, all of a sudden I have a child, then it's more, I need that time off, or could I work at home one day a week? And
the flexibility.
Exactly. And I think so that's where you have to evolve as a leader as well, to be open to what's going on. And I think to your point is, I think that's why I wanted you on the show also as well, is because you have this long breadth of experience to turn around and say, where I am today, I understand it better. Or conceptually, I understood it years ago, but now I really understand the practicality, or have how to execute on it, because I've either fallen on my face or someone helped me, right?
You learn, you live and learn. And it's a lot like being a parent, it's like you have a child, and then it's like, there's no manual there, and you mess up sometimes, and your kids are a guinea pig in some ways of just testing things out. Okay, that worked. But But I think I learned a lot when I moved over to the tech side of automotive too, because there's such a strong culture in tech, and that's very different, right, than other industries. And so, when I first came over to Edmunds.com, and all of a sudden, like, even the office, colorful and bright and kind of Google-esque, and, and there were things like arcades, we had an arcade in the building at the time, and a nap room, and what would be really considered weird, in auto retail per se. And then I started to realize, like, okay, this is actually geared towards attracting a certain type of employee. And it really was the tech, right? Because if you're going to compete against the Googles of the world, and the Ubers and all these companies like that, you gotta attract. So I think it's, once again, that tech mindset is so different than mine. I don't need an arcade, but I'm also not coding, for 12 hours in a day.
Exactly.
And so, are we willing to kind of let go of some of the tradition that we were used to in terms of like leadership and management, and to get to that person that we're trying to attract it and motivate?
Exactly. And I think that's a really interesting point as well, because if you're moving from, I always say the title, the title of manager means so many different things. It means in every company, it's different. So when you're either hiring someone or you're applying for a job somewhere, I always tell people to make sure you understand what the day-to-day is, because I could be applying for a manager, an account manager at TrueCar versus an account manager at my company could be completely different. One, because of the size, but also of duties. And so you have to understand what the day-to-day is to see if that fits for you as an individual. If you're going to lead a team of 5 people versus a team of 30 people or a team of 50 people, completely different skill set, structure, strategy in order to deliver results. So let me pivot a little bit on this. Were you always, I'm always curious, if you look back at all the jobs you had, even when you were young, school, anything, is there a common thread in all of your jobs? Meaning, were you always someone that somehow ended up in charge, or people congregated around or listened to because it's just watching you from afar, a conference thing, you have this, people like talking to you and they like being around you. So I'm just curious. I always ask a lot of people this, and there usually is. Like, if you ripped away the titles of the jobs and you just looked at it, you probably go, like, oh yeah, there is a common thread. What is there, and what would it be?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I've never been asked that. So, I mean, I certainly have always been very people oriented, right? And I think it goes back to just being a middle child. Where are you in the order of the Pasch family?
There's 5 boys. The last set were twins. So, but I'm number 2. And
You're number 2. Okay.
And Brian's number 3. So
you're technically a middle. So I was number 3 of 4. So I think as a middle child, it may not be for all middle childs, but I think you're kind of like you're trying to find your position in the family. You don't have the attention of the oldest. You're not the youngest. And I think I've always been kind of at the center, of even my own family in that way, from a people standpoint, kind of the glue. And so I think that has always kind of been maybe a thread throughout my career. I think there's from an influence standpoint, I've never influenced through muscle. I've influenced through connection and through understanding, through empathy in some ways. And so I think that's also been kind of a thread is that, I've seen people, I've had bosses that have kind of led by muscle, and by kind of pounding their chest, and for me it's been more through connection of people.
Yeah. So I have very similar, as the number 2, I was sort of the mediator in the family, made sure everybody was okay. But I always found myself, because I did this one time, I was working with somebody in management and I was helping them understand that thread. And so I did it to myself. And I said, well, somehow, even without the title, I always ended up in the front, like organizing things, or people would go, how should we figure this out? And what should we do? They always were looking to me, not because I forced it. I just said, well, we got to get this done. And nobody else was taking a step. So I said, all right, well, let's figure this out. But it was always together
Yes.
versus I know I'm smarter, I'm in charge. And I see that in you, is that you lead, but you almost like the Pied Piper type of a person, meaning that you get
Okay.
people around you and we all get going, versus uh, that like you said, that you don't lead by muscle, by
Muscle.
threats, by, this is the only way. You're, here we go. And I think that ties in really well, where even with your initiative with women in automotive,
Yeah.
it seems like that was such an organic, like it came out of nowhere, but
Yes.
it seemed to accelerate really, really quickly to something that had a lot of energy and focus literally overnight. So if you could just explain to the audience a little bit about what Women in Automotive and how that is, because I just find it fascinating how quickly it just happened and grew.
Yeah, and I've been involved in women automotive for the last couple of years, but my first conference I ever attended, it was when it first launched in 2015,
Mm-hmm.
and it was eye-opening because I had been working in the business probably for 15, 16 years at that
Mm-hmm.
time, and women automotive, it was one of those things like you didn't even know you needed as a woman in
Right.
automotive, at least for
Right.
me. I didn't realize I needed it, and because you had, I'd been kind of, going down this journey and this path, not even realizing the isolation at times, really how lonely it is, to be the only one, as I like to say,
Right.
to be, and to not necessarily see leadership that looks like you,
Mm-hmm.
that thinks like you, probably more importantly. And so I think women in automotive really filled that gap,
Yeah.
because, like I said, there were plenty of us women that kind of were navigating this kind of male dominated industry
Mm-hmm.
on our own. And now all of a sudden we have a group that we can connect with, and that we can
Right. Right.
talk about our challenges without necessarily being judged or questioned. It's like, I get you. You tell me your
Yeah.
challenges as a woman and as a woman leader, and I understand. I've been through the same thing. And here are some things that I use to overcome that. And I think that was so powerful. And I agree with you. It kind of just came out of nowhere. Like it was needed. But
Well, and it was funny when it first happened. I remember just sitting on the sidelines listening, and there were the people who were not detractors. I don't think
yes.
anybody was like, but I thought some people said that, well, why do we need this? Oh, well, then we need this and we need this and we need this. But I remember talking to, who was it? I think it was Jody DeVere,
Yes.
having a conversation because she came to our office one time to talk about her business, Ask Patty, and we were talking, and she said that. She goes, it's very hard to find when you're leading, and I like the way you put that,
Mm-hmm.
is I don't see examples of people who lead like I do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very hard to keep your focus, your commitment, because as you said, when you look around and you say, I'm the only one
Yes.
who thinks this way, you either doubt yourself or go, all right, I'm the crazy one, until all of a sudden you put a bunch of people in a room and they're all going, no, you're not crazy, they're crazy, or it's just a different style. But I remember speaking at, I think I spoke at the first one or the second
Mm-hmm.
one of them, and it was just such a great conference, because it wasn't what some people could potentially think is, oh, it's a bunch of women who are just mad about, and I said, absolutely not. It was very inspiring. And it was just a camaraderie of people who then I think just allowed everybody to be stronger, because you created now a network of people that, we used to always joke about it from marketing standpoint. Sometimes in the dealership, the marketing person is the lonely person because no one else
Mm-hmm.
understands what they do. And it's, oh, that's Glenn's job, he's over in the back. And then all of a sudden they go to a conference and they meet all those the marketing people there. And now they create their own little marketing 20 group, so to speak, or a group of people that they can call up and say, hey, I'm thinking this. And they're like, no, you're on the right track, and building that network. Because I really think for leaders, I was talking with Troy Spring about this, and he said mentors are really important for new leaders,
Mm-hmm.
having mentors. So
Yes. And that network is it's challenging from a mentorship standpoint when you are different. And, it because a lot of times, most people are good people, but we have our biases at times. And one of the biases that we all have is, it's very easy to gravitate and lean towards people either like yourself. And I don't just mean like race wise or gender wise, but just even personality wise. And so from a mentorship standpoint, that can play out, right? Because you're looking at someone, you want to mentor someone, and they remind you of them or of yourself. Right? They remind you of yourself. You go, I remember being in that person's shoes. Well, when you're the only one at times, you may not remind anybody of themselves. And so I'm very thankful really of all of the white men in my life that have chosen me to mentor, because I feel like they had to take a really big leap in some ways, because I didn't remind them of themselves, and I was very different in that way, yet they still kind of found those commonalities to latch on to. And that's so important. That's why diversity is important. It's not about, the race and gender. It is about your mindsets. And I, as a woman, I can tell you, even how I handle vulnerability and emotion, it looks different.
Sure.
And so a guy might have emotion involved in his leadership style. And if that is a standard and you're in a male dominated industry, that is the standard.
Right.
It looks like this. And so we can easily judge someone who, like being a woman who comes from a different way of communicating. We constantly have to adjust and really change how we're raised so that we can fit into, this male dominated space.
So let me touch on that, because again, it's interesting, because when you said I'm grateful to the people who just saw me as someone who has talent, who they could mentor without any judgment. And to your point is, well, they might have said, hey, take risk. I mean, I look at it, I did it the other day, and it was a very funny thing. I was talking to my wife about it, and I was having meetings because, Denise, who's our president, just had a child. And so she's out. So I'm back into the day to day. And I sat down, I started having meetings with all the department heads. And I said, I think there's 6 of them or 7 of them, and 6 of them are women, and 1 of them's a man. And it wasn't a conscious thought. It was just, they're the most talented person, so that's who gets and I think that has evolved. But but what I wanted to talk about is that perception of how do you find that mentor if you're that person, and you said, how do you try to find that mentor? And then you touched on having to change. Like, how much are you trying to change your style to please a mentor to get the attention? Or talk to me about that little bit in there.
So I think from a mentor standpoint, I think where I see people make a mistake is, and it happens to me, and I'm very empathetic, but at times you'll have someone just kind of reach out to you and say, can you be my mentor?
Right.
And I would say, my best mentorship relationships weren't because I requested it or somebody requested it from me.
Right.
They happen kind of organically, either in working relationships, obviously.
Right.
There have been situations where I've reached out for advice from somebody. So, it's not a formal mentorship, but in some ways, I'm going to them, I'm asking for their advice. But I think in many ways, some of my mentorships have happened because I've given something to them too. I think it goes both ways. Right. And I think we can think of mentorship as like, what can you as a mentor do for me as a mentee? But a lot of times it's, no, I'm going to help you. It might be on a project that even, it's not even my job, but I'm going to kind of like jump in there and help you so I can get some exposure to you, and I'm giving something back to you as well. So
I like that point. I like that point because as you were saying it, I was going through who were mentors in my life, and it was either someone I was working under, but I had a job to do in that team. Some of my mentors where I was in hospitality and the owner of the restaurant, but he saw me working and doing what I was doing. As I said, people would say, oh, I need your help doing this. It wasn't my job, but just to make sure everything got done. And he started talking to me and said, where's your brain? What are you thinking? Why are you doing that? So it wasn't formalized, but it was also because most of my mentors or people who influenced me is because we were, as you said, we're working together on a project, or I came in to help a project, or they came in to help. So there, it wasn't me just going, please mentor me. It was, they could see the work going on and they gave advice like a coach type mentality.
Yeah, I had a mentor that was a lawyer one time. He was at JD Power, but he was a former lawyer. So he liked to argue. He loved to debate. And I didn't work for him at the time, but I worked on, you know, adjacent projects with him. And he ended up being my mentor in part because I would just engage him in arguing all the time, which is something that he loved to do. He loved to kind of like bring up a topic, and the way he thought it through was like debate and argument. And I love that. I'm like all about that. And so we ended up just kind of forming that mentorship in really kind of like brainstorming in those kind of discussions that helped him kind of think through certain strategies, you know? And I think, so that's kind of an example of like, I didn't work for you, but we still kind of engaged on a level that was beyond just like, can you be my mentor?
But I like that because, and I think that's the important thing to take away from this for the audience, is that it can't be a one-way street. You can't just say, give to me. It is. And even they got something from the interaction with you that was, okay, this is fun. I'm getting something out of it. So, okay, we'll give you, versus someone who just says, can you help me, help me, help me? And you go, well, what's in it for me? I think that's a really good way. So, but I don't want to miss the other half of that, which was when you're in that position and you're new, how part of it is, I think, experimenting, but I want to hear your opinion, is how do you be careful that you're not just changing your personality, changing your thoughts just to please someone, you know, to get I don't want to say attention, but get recognized or whatever. And then a year or two down the road, you are so far away from who you really are, or what you believe, that you're going, how did I end up down here? How does one
navigate that?
And protect that I don't do that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, and I think even just beyond mentoring, it's like, as you kind of move up the ladder, you're constantly having to make those decisions of, you know, do I conform to get ahead in some cases?
Right.
Or do I kind of stick to my principles? And so what I don't want to lie about is I certainly have played the game in my career, particularly as, and I'll bring up as a woman of color, like I've definitely played that game because I think you kind of have to in some ways. So I may want to be myself at the purest level, but I also have to kind of assimilate to the majority. I'm in a male dominated space. It's really important for me to understand how men think, probably more than women in some ways because of that. And so that's an example of kind of conforming, is kind of understanding this is the audience that I'm in front of, or that I'm trying to influence, and I really need to be speaking to them, which means I may have to put some of my own personality in some ways aside for a second. But I think not to the point where I'm selling my soul or selling my principles. And I think we all have a line, and we have to figure out what that line is, right? I don't want to sell out to the point where I'm doing work that I don't quite believe in, or
or you just don't feel. You look in the mirror and you go, oh, this is not me.
It's not you. And you kind of you know what that is, and it usually takes you know, I've had times where I haven't spoken up, as an example, right? Like that's probably the best example, where you know you're in that meeting and you disagree and you go along with it. And then what happens is you learn through seeing that, God, if I would have spoken up, this project didn't go well. It didn't end well. And part of the problem was me, that I didn't speak up. And so I think as a leader, you learn really from those failures, when you realize either that you should have spoken up or that your voice could have counted. It counted, right? And I think that's another mistake we make, is like, we think, well, no, my opinion's not going to matter, or I'll just let this go. It's just one little thing I'm letting go.
Right.
And those start
Right.
to snowball, like
They
you said, and you
do.
realize, like, who am I?
I think so. I always tell, and in this series, I've mentioned it a few times, is when you're promoted and you're taking over a team, we have a tendency to look down at our team, meaning like, that's my focus now. My focus is my team, not to look down, but that's my responsibility, versus remembering now you are part of someone else's team. Because as a manager, you're on a team of managers and you report to someone else. So now you also have to think about, well, what are the rules of this team? Yes, I know the rules of my team down here because I'm setting them, or I'm holding them accountable. But this is a new game.
Yeah.
And what are the requirements? What are the team dynamics? And I think, to your point, who is this audience? How do they like information given to them? I can talk to my team this way, but when I'm on this team, you can't do that, or I have to figure it out. And it's can be seen as playing the game, or it can be sacrificed. I think the more that you understand, well, this is the way this leader of this team likes information given to them, or this is the way they run meetings, and I'm watching and I'm learning, and then you strategically allow your voice to come out and do that. And I think, to your point, is I think we waste time forgetting that we're on someone's team. And then we just let things go, or we say, well, my opinion doesn't matter, or I'm new. And then all of a sudden, 6 months, a year go by, and you're sitting there going, I knew this wasn't going to work. I knew this wasn't going to work.
Yes.
I look at my notes. I wrote, this is not going to work. And then it's finding that courage to be able to communicate with them. But I always say, you wouldn't be on that team if they didn't think you were capable. So it's your job to figure out that. So let me ask you that on that. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say also, and part of that is, there will be a question of, is this the right culture for me as a leader? And I've certainly had situations where I did my best to exert my style of leadership or my opinion, and at a certain point I realized, like, maybe this is not a good fit as a team. We're just not on the same page, or as a company, I'm at a point where I need to move on because we're thinking in different ways, or our cultures are not fitting. So I think once you try to adjust, and you realize, like, no, they're over here, I'm over here.
Right.
Maybe I need something new.
Yeah. And I think, that's what I wanted to focus on just for a minute, is that point of saying, I don't think a lot of people think that way, meaning that they don't realize it's always the managing, what they call managing up and managing down.
Yes.
When you're doing that, when you're now on that team and you're watching this, like you said, it's trying to do that. Where do I fit? Whatever. It's different now, I would think, because of your confidence of who you are and sort of your track record. But when you're there, is it watching the leader of this team and figuring out what they need and they want and how they want it? Is that a good first step for someone on that team?
Yeah, I think managing up is just such a good skill to have. And it's also something that I think I learned, later than I probably should have.
Right.
And I as an example, I'll give you an example. I had a boss at one time where, I would be speaking up in a meeting and I did not feel heard. It just felt like every time I gave my opinion, or if I disagreed, it just wasn't taken well. It was like there was defensive-ness,
right,
or it was just kind of glossed over. And so I realized with that boss that if I disagreed, it didn't go over well all the time when I did it in front of a lot of people.
Right.
And and my leader prior to that boss was the lawyer, where we argued all the time and we debated, and he respected people who disagreed with him. And so I think that is probably the hardest thing, is like adjusting when you move cultures and you have one boss or one leader in in your group that you're around who this works for them, arguing, disagreeing with them in front of others.
They like the disagreement. Yeah.
They like it. And then I go to another culture where, no, that's seen as disrespect. And so with that boss, what I ended up having to do is, a lot of times I would meet with him prior, let's say, to the group meeting, I'd kind of seed some of my thoughts with him individually. That way, when I went into the meeting, it was like I already kind of had him bought in a little bit
Right.
on where I was going. It wasn't the first time he had ever heard that point of view. And so that was an adjustment. Even my language, I had to adjust at times because I could be very like opinionated and just be like, I think we should do this. And so I started using words. It's amazing when you use the word consider in something. Have you considered
Right.
the idea? Have we thought about? And so it's just one little word that makes it sound, or it does show, it's an indicator that you're open.
But I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is communication styles.
Yes.
You know, and I think that's where that managing up as a skill, I tried to break it down and just say, now you're on a new team, right? Over here, you're in charge of this team, and now you're part of the team. And you have to understand that leader, and you have to think through, are they a dominant person? Meaning I had same thing, I had two different bosses at one time in the same, like I reported to two, and I'd go to this person and literally, here's my report. And they would just flip it to the end and shut it. And I wanted to tell them all the great things I did with the report. And they're like, did we win or lose? Like that was the mentality, and then leave. The other person, they wanted the story. They got into the story. So I had to realize that that if me going in and the person just going, okay, thank you, that wasn't a bad reflection. I used to take it personally that, oh, I tried. And my whole day was, what did I do wrong? Until someone said, that's the way they are. Yeah. They just want to go to the end. They trust you that you did your job. This person actually came from like an operational background. They loved all the stories. They loved how you put everything together. They wanted to see the graphs. They wanted to see everything. And I think, to your point, we forget that everybody has a way that they receive communication. And as it's part of our job being on a team is, okay, who are the players? Who's what? To your point is, I don't disagree. I can disagree, but I can't use that language because the barrier goes up. But if I say, well, have you thought about this? Well, that's a discussion versus I think you're wrong, right? Yes. We accomplish the same thing. And I think that's a really good lesson for those people listening, because it's interesting. We've threaded through, you know, how communication happens across everything, whether we're one-on-one with someone, we're working with a team, or now I'm part of a team and I'm receiving communication, or I have to communicate back. Constantly have to think about that to personalize everything so we become more strategic. And then to your point of playing the game, sometimes it is, well, this is what they want to see, or this is how they want to see the information. Well, then I'll put on that sort of persona for them, because that just gets the ball moved forward. It's not me giving away my personality, or you have to be careful of that. But my point is, if that's the way they want to hear it, okay, I'll do that.
It's a lot of work. I mean, you know, I think that's what they don't tell you from a leadership standpoint. And
I don't know, whoever said leadership is easy is crazy.
It's just a lot of work adapting and adjusting in that way. And you know, it's so funny because I remember working for someone also, this is just another story where you know, when you know a lot, or you have this experience, there's times where you just kind of want to rest on your laurels. Like, trust me, because like, look at my resume. But it doesn't really work like that for everybody.
No.
They don't just have respect for you because you can show them your, you know, companies you worked for previously, or even from a team member standpoint, you know, like, respect isn't just given because either my title is what it is, or because of, let's say, my pedigree. And that's kind of a hard pill to swallow, particularly as you move through your career, is that it's easy to be like, trust me and respect me because of this resume or because of my title. And so I've had to humble myself at times, and my own ego, to actually say, all right, fine, I'm going to give you the background. I have this idea, and I'm going to actually have to sell it to you.
Right.
As if you didn't know my pedigree, because that's what you need to get to be bought in.
And it is very tough at times because you know, I always say, I know the end of the story. I know where this is going to end up, but okay, if this is what we have to do to get there, okay. But
okay.
I know that, but I always say, I know how this is going to end. I know the end of the story, but okay, let's go take this journey. And that's okay.
It's
I
okay.
always say, as long as I don't have to do that every time, where eventually, can you trust me now? We've done it a couple times and I told you where we were going. We ended up there. Can we just skip and just trust me and go there?
Yeah. Once you get over that hump,
Yes.
Absolutely.
So I got one or two more questions for you.
Yeah.
This has been fun. See,
It
because I told you
has.
we're not the, like, I love when people who I've interviewed always say, no one ever asked me that before. I never got asked that. And that was the fun part of this, is because, and what I love about your answers are, this is part of you that is, you know, really excites you. You can see that this is a passion of yours. You love talking about this, you know, and as I said to a lot of people, this is stuff that I would recommend, you know, and again, I don't know what, if you do this, but you have such value to people, to young people out there, because, you know, we get caught up in, we're out there doing our job and we're out speaking at conference. And as I said in the beginning, we're not talking about marketing. We're not talking about automotive. And all of a sudden you forget, like, this is really gets us excited.
You forget what you know.
Yeah.
You forget what you know. I mean, really, I think you kind of go and you do it all the time. It's funny because before I came on this podcast, I had a team meeting and I joked with my team. I said, hey, I'm going on this podcast and I'm going to talk about leadership. And I hope you guys don't watch it and poke holes and say this girl's making this stuff up. But I think you really forget that there's really some good principles that you believe in and you live by. Yeah. But you really don't look at yourself from the outside. So it is great to talk about these kind of topics.
I got two last questions. Number one is, where you want to be in, you know, I hate to say what's your 5-year plan, but you know, you've done a lot and you've had a lot of, what's the next step for you, or the next challenge for you? If, you know, your goal, I'd like to be doing this down the road.
I mean, I'm really looking to influence people beyond the automotive industry. I mean, I think that just as a personal goal, you know, I've obviously had my toe from a woman's standpoint in women in automotive, but that's something I take for granted, really, as well as just kind of being a role model to not just people in automotive, but like women, people of color, and so the youth. You know, so I really want to tap into being a leader from that standpoint and influencing these communities out there through my own story. I think professionally, you know, I think I've grown, and I think this is something that somebody new is going to learn through their career. I moved up the ladder fast because I was good at leading things that I was great at. Right. I mean, really, I would say probably through when I became a director, all of those promotions were, I excelled tactically and therefore got a promotion. And I think, I think what I've really been over the last 5 years is really leading things that I don't know anything about. Right. I think I recently had PR join my umbrella, and I don't have an extensive background, you know, necessarily from a PR standpoint, but someone on my team does. Right. And so I think that shift, I think, in thinking about leadership, less about what you know and your tactics, and more of like, how can you create this vision and influence and be comfortable with leading things that you actually don't have experience in or you don't know. And so I think I see myself, if I want to scale and become a, you know, CEO like you and grow and be managing, you know, hundreds of people, right, then you're going to have to get really used to tactically not being an expert. And I think that's kind of, to me, I continue to kind of want to grow in that way.
Great. That's a great. I love that, because I think you could. I absolutely think you could run a large company easily, because I think, just talking to you more about this, it's not about that I'm doing things that I don't know, because what you know is, you know how to lead people. And if you know how to lead people, you know, I always say, most of my team, probably all my team, is way smarter than me in some of the tactical things, but that's why I have them. My job is to lead it and go in this direction. Their job is to tactically do things. So you start building those pieces around. So I think that's the key.
Yeah, and the confidence, that takes a certain level of confidence. And I find myself where I've very much matured in that way. But there's still that immature manager in me and leader in me every once in a while that kind of, you question yourself and say, ooh, I'm taking on something maybe that I don't have the tactical knowledge on, and therefore am I the right person? And I think you have to get over that as you expand. You can't grow and be a CEO or have hundreds of people or thousands of people if you literally have your hands in every single project. And I think that transition is a constant.
Letting go. Yeah.
Right. That's a constant for me, is just letting go. And so that's professionally, I think, scaling your leadership is where I want to continue to grow.
Well, I'm excited because I think that where you're going to be, I just think that's going to be awesome. All right. So last question for you. So as I said, we talked about like what best advice if you had someone new, but if you're talking to, let's scale down even younger. Let's say you were talking to a group of, say, high school seniors, or even college. They're going into the job market first. Like, we're going out our first job, right? Before we talked about someone who took over a team, that means they built up some. They're getting hired in, let's say for TrueCar. All of a sudden, new round of employees coming in. They're fresh-faced right out of school. What would you say the best advice for their first, focus for their first year working at TrueCar? What would it be?
Oh, so just in terms of how can they be successful and set themselves up for success?
Yep.
I think it's probably one of two things. You either need to pick something or a profession that you have a lot of passion for. Like you love it. You could see yourself doing it for free.
Right.
We all got that little analogy. What would you do for free? I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Right.
Because when you have passion for something, you are going to excel. Yeah. You're going to want to mentor people on it. You're going to want to grow in that area. And so you have to think about what that is that you have passion for. And it has to be you have to have clarity on that. See, I joined the automotive industry, and it's not because I had passion for cars, but I do have passion for consumer, the sales process. I have a lot of passion for the insights and the story of buying a car. And so I think really clarify your passion, because if I just thought about cars, I never would have joined the automotive industry. In fact, I almost didn't want to join auto because of that. So have real clarity on what your passion is, and the maturity to really see that, okay, this does align with it. The second part would be willing to take some either steps back or some sacrifices. My first job at JD Power was not a sexy job for me, as I like to say. Right. I saw myself at an ad agency because on TV, the ad agencies looked really like exciting. They were doing these pitches. And instead, I took a job as a marketing researcher checking data, on a study. That was my very first job at JD Power. So it wasn't the most exciting job, but it was short term. I was on that project for a year, and then all of a sudden I'm in front of clients and I'm doing some of those things that I really wanted to do. So I think you also have to be willing to take a sacrifice, as long as it positions you with the right people or really fills in your skill set. I thank God for JD Power today, because while you might see me on a stage speaking, or I might look like I'm kind of that more of the, talkative personality, extrovert type, I'm actually a data geek secretly inside because of that basis of being in marketing research. So I think you have to think about your career, not just for that job, but is this going to give me a foundation that really is going to set me up?
Going to help you. Yes.
For success.
Exactly. That's great. That's great advice. I love that. I love that, because that is, put your head down, work, but be
Yes.
willing to take jobs that you may not. A lot of times I think that what's really great about that advice is you can't always see the thread of where you're going or what
Yeah.
this is going to do. But if you trust that, if I position myself, or I could see how this could build my skill set, or I'm learning something else. I look back at my career and I've done so many, sometimes I've done so many different jobs. All of a sudden it'll pop in my head and oh yeah, I did do that. I completely forgot about it. And I have this weird flash and go, oh, I didn't realize. But what I see is how that actually helps me now. And I never knew about it. And I think, well, if I didn't do that, I don't know if I could do what I'm doing now. It's a very interesting thing. I like that.
Yeah, I know. I remember the first time I ever went into sales. I remember thinking, I'm a client person. I love to help, on this client success side, retaining clients, servicing them.
Yep.
But I'm not a closer. I'm not a salesperson. I don't want to go and ask for business all the time, right? And so I just remember, like, best thing I ever did, because it's like the mindset that no, sales is still very much people influence. Sure. The service side, showing value. And so you sometimes have these like preconceived notions
sure.
of what a profession is based on whatever you had exposure to.
Yeah.
And you can take your own self into that profession and make it work for you. And for me, selling wasn't about the closing, but it was about like showing the value.
Right.
And then of course you close some sales.
Yeah, but the close came because you put your it fit you because your heart was in the value and making sure the customer was fine. And then they sold themselves versus I'm going to sell you on how good it is. And the person walks out going, did I just buy something?
Exactly.
Right?
And that's what turned me off in my mind.
Exactly.
And so I think a lot of times we don't accept positions, or we don't put ourselves out there because we have this preconceived notion of what that profession is or who we are.
Right.
And then we kind of like, we limit ourselves.
You can miss out on actually having a skill that maybe you didn't realize. And even if it's not your career and you say, well, I don't really, you've the mere fact that you did something that you weren't comfortable with is probably one of the biggest assets in your life, because then it gets easier to try things.
It's true.
And it doesn't have to be perfect. We were just at DMSC on one of my panels. One of the dealers said, when I was saying, well, what advice would you give? We were talking about digital retailing and process. He said, just do it. He goes, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just get started. You just have to get started. And I think that's a really great to tie it in for those fresh faces and those new students is, you just got to try things. You got to do things. And every time you're doing something, or even when you leave something and you move on, what did you learn? Because you're just constantly cobbling together this skill set, where now years later, your toolbox is so filled with different tools that maybe you haven't used in a while. And all of a sudden you go, oh, well, wait a minute, I have something for that.
That's it. And I've kind of gotten rid of the 5-year plan, in some ways, because I just feel like things are evolving and you're so nimble. And maybe it's because I've worked on the digital side for like the last decade, where things are just constantly changing. But I remember I don't know if you were like that early in your career, but they were like, what's your 5-year plan? What's your 10-year plan?
I don't even know what I'm doing next week. So I always laugh at that. I say, I know where we want to, company-wide, but how we get there. I think that's a difference of, I know where, like 5 years, I'd like to be this way, but how we get there, I don't know. It's, there's too many variables going on. And I think that's what a good leader has to do, is be able to adapt, still keep their eye on where we're going. But one of the people I think it was Mike Cirillo, and the very first person I interviewed for this, always said a leader's job is to worry about the strategy, which is the mission this way, and then tactics. That's where the flexibility comes in, where you have to tactically pivot, but you still go, oh, but that's where we're going.
Here's our North Star. This is the North Star, but how we get there might look a little differently. But I think we could all agree, even in 2020, no one thought we'd be where we are today 5 years ago. So, you can't plan it out perfectly.
No, listen, if 2020 has taught us anything, you cannot plan anything. Well, I had a fantastic time. I could sit here and chat for hours with you. So I want to thank you so much for taking time out. I think there's so much value here. people who are going to listen to this, I really think they're going to, just really gain a lot of great knowledge. So I appreciate that. So please tell me where if people wanted to follow you on social media or reach out or just connect, where would they find you and how would they find you?
Yeah, so I'm on, of course, all the social media, but primarily I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook under Kerri Wise. So
Okay.
Please reach out to me. You can also email me at kwise@truecar.com, and I'd love to hear from you. So
That's
thank you so
fantastic.
much, Glenn, for giving me a chance to share my story in a
I
different
love
way
it.
than I'm used
I
to.
love it. I love it. And I love the fact, as I always say, what makes me happiest is every single guest said this was so much fun, because to your point is I forgot what I knew and no one ever asked me this. So that's a really great thing. So anyway, folks, thank you so much for watching today. As always, as I say, please subscribe, please share this out. The reason I made this channel or started this channel was there's a lot of people who are in the position of leading, and there's not a lot of training out there. So that's the point of this. So this can help you. Please put your comments down below. I'd love to hear what you say, or maybe there's a topic you would like me to talk about, and either I will, or I'll find someone like Kerri to come in and we'll have that conversation. So again, thank you so much for your attention. And as I say it at the end of every show, you're in charge, but now Kerri gave you a few more tools to help you become more successful. Thanks so much. I'll see you next time.